Assalamu alaikum. How you doing, brother?
Walaikum assalam. I'm doing really well. How are you? Long time no see.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's doing really well. Your beard, mashallah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, looks good, man.
Oh, okay.
People are stingy with their compliments, you know? I like to be giving with mine.
I agree. I agree.
Um, yeah, so I wanted to chat with you today about a very important topic. It's certainly not a 40-minute topic. So this one's going to have to be broken down in a couple of segments. And it's really not a topic that people like to talk about in general, about mental health, for lack of a better term. And we can even kind of get into what that means. And I had two things that happened here uh, before this session that kind of like got my thoughts going about this very topic. But wanted to kick it over to you. I mean, how you feel about this in general before we kind of get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. So mental health is very big. It is probably the most prominent chronic disease in the world now, especially after the pandemic. And but there are some strategies that people can employ holistically. As the inputs of the world are coming into you, whether it's spiritually or whether it's environmentally or whether it's in food, there are strategies that you can employ to help mitigate the impact of emotional anxiety or stress of any kind that we're seeing today.
Absolutely. And on cue, my technological distractions jump in.
Of
So,
course.
and that's honestly, but the funny thing about that is, and yeah, I agree with your point, by the way. I mean, at this point, I think in the past, maybe it was like, is mental health a thing? At this point, I think that's the default. Like, I believe personally that everybody needs assistance, everybody needs some type of therapy, because that's just the world that we're born into. It's literally designed by very smart people to drive you nuts. So in a way, if you're not nuts, then you're really nuts. So that's kind of how I feel about the situation. Whereas in the past, maybe yeah, because it was the opposite, right? Grammar was a thing, language was a thing. So you had all the antidotes to like already built in society, and therefore mental health wasn't as much of a thing. It still was, but it was more intuitive. Whereas where now it's really the opposite. But coming into this session, there were two things. I wanted to get on this call with you because I was excited. I love our conversations, and so I wanted to like let's get to it, right? And this is the paradox you always have: the urgent versus the important. I have this important thing I want to do. I want to talk to you, and then I come in the back here, and this place is a mess. I don't know what happened if a raccoon got in here or something, but it's literally like broken glass, and I was just disoriented. And the other thing that happened was I have these really nice wireless headphones that I love to listen through, and I was trying to connect them to this computer, which you think should be simple, like hit Bluetooth, pair your device. I even did all the right things. I held it down for the right amount of seconds. It's like a freaking rebate, right? Like jump on one foot 3 times. I did all their thing. It still wouldn't work. And then I disconnected it from my other device and my other device, literally my iPhone and my Samsung, because that's where I'm at. And and then tried to reconnect before I finally was like, I'm done. I'm gonna call because I want to have this conversation. And the reason why I say all that is it not indicative in a way? It's like this is really what's getting in the way. And it's like at a certain point, like this is what stopped literally the real conversation is all these technological inhibitions and the fact that when things are messy and are like all over the place, whether physically or in our mind, you really can't think straight.
100%. And God knows we have a bunch of stuff coming out at us in life, more so today. And we need better tools to help navigate. I mean, that sounds so cliche, but um, I think we do need better tools. I think the tools are already there, but we need better tools to help navigate the onslaught of stuff and information and the times that we live in, and better strategies to cope with them. I think the strategies are there. I think it's just a matter of knowledge.
So when you say tools, right? And I think you're right because really what we're talking about is implementation. I think maybe more accurate than tools.
Yeah.
Because tools. So are we talking about apps? Are we talking about yoga? Are we talking about vikr practices? Are we talking about what I'm saying? Like what exactly here? And I think that's the whole point, right? Is that and I was just thinking about this earlier, right? Like knowledge is the lost riding animal of the believer, right? So it's like we don't have a monopoly on truth. Truth has a monopoly on itself. And to the extent that we're seekers of truth, then we are allowed to get it from wherever, so long as it's sound. And I think that's really the age that we're in. You have all these practices, for example, like, meditation that people have really got down to a science. You have these technological advancements that, all these, apps of productivity and whatnot that help with this. And then you have our own spiritual practices. So I just feel like we're at the point now where how can we practically, you and I, as busy professionals, what things do we know that we can actually use in our lives that can help us navigate this mess?
Mm. Yeah, actually, I saw a patient this morning, um, and this person suffers from anxiety, and I've got a couple of more patients coming up for depression and ADHD as they were identified. And the
So you see
tools that,
patients, like what in
uh,
what capacity?
as a holistic nutritionist,
Okay.
so my brother is a psychiatrist, and I talk about food all the time. And so I'm formalizing my casual discussions on food
Okay.
into a practice while I still have my startup in food.
Right.
And what I've learned in food and farming, which is where my startup is, I'm also learning how that is really pure food
Yeah.
and or the lack thereof.
Right.
99+% of the time that the food lands on a plate has an impact to mental anxiety or mental or
Mm.
emotional issues.
Mm.
It's a huge cog in the grand picture of the impacts that are coming at us, that the impact that it has on us. So there's emotional. Are we meditative in the way we live our lives? And when I say meditative, have we have we relinquished control to Allah?
Right. Right. Right.
That's
Exactly.
that's kind of what I mean by are we
Sure.
meditative? We have we relinquished our control because that is the way it is.
Right.
The
Exactly.
more we try to gain control, the more I think we end up in issues. It's a slippery slope, and it can have a
Exactly.
downward spiral if you don't have the capacity to be able to look at yourself in a self-critical way. So my angle is always going to be, and I had this discussion this morning with this patient who is taking a number of medications,
Hmm.
um, and the idea is to get off those chemical uh, inputs
Mm.
because those cause imbalance in the human body.
Mm.
And there's going to be two modalities that I'm going to use. To put it very simply, there's
Okay.
several, but there are two modalities.
Sure.
And one of them I said, look, we've already got the cheat notes. We've got the cliff notes in the Quran and the Hadith
Right.
and the Sunnah,
Right.
where what they are teaching us today in yoga and meditation practices, we wrote the book on. I
Right.
mean, sure, there are
Sure.
traditions that go way back, but in terms of medicines that work and the the way of the prophet and how meditative he was,
Right.
um, we could take a kind of a pause in our Islamic rituals and really
Exactly.
turn them into real meditative practices.
Right.
And that is actually a discussion that I had with this individual,
Mm.
not so much about Islam, but more about um, he was saying, yeah, he happened to be a Muslim. He was saying, I pray. And I said, one of the modalities that we're going to be speaking about is, are you intentional in your prayer?
Mm.
Are you thinking about what you're praying to? Have you completely seized control of yourself? Because we're not in control. And I like to say this to a lot of people that we're on this. Hopefully, this metaphor makes sense. But this is something that I use, and this is how I visualize life. And I visualize life as a fast moving train that eventually has an end,
Right.
and we have no choice but to stay on that train.
Right.
Now, how there's a whole bunch of things happen to us while we're on that train. And it is how and we know what our destination is. It is how we react or proact towards those things that are occurring to us is how we're going to end up, living our life in a healthful way, in a mindful way, And again, I know that word is thrown around a lot. What
Sure.
is mindfulness? It's the intention, being intentional in absolutely everything that we do. So, sorry,
No,
sort of
that's okay.
kind of,
You said something important that I want to jump back to real quick. It's the control aspect because I think you're absolutely right about that. I mean, there's a quote, right? Like, watch out for your words because you watch out for your thoughts because your thoughts become your words become your habits become your words become your actions become your habits become your destiny. But I always wondered where's before thoughts? Where do your thoughts come from? And I kept asking people over and over again until finally I realized I made dua, and then Allah answered the question for me essentially through like different people. And what I learned was your thoughts basically come through the five senses: what you eat, what you see, what you hear. You're like a big dish. You're throwing in the ingredients, and that's really the only point of control because it's kind of like a downhill like a snowball, right? When it goes from like inputs is really the top of that hill, right? But after that, it's thoughts and it gets more momentum. And after that, it's words and it gets more momentum. And after that, it's actions. So what I realize is I know myself. Yeah, sometimes I can catch it at the action, but really the thoughts is like most effect. But really, it's actually at the top of that with the inputs. But here's a practical question of all that, right? I know that, and I know ADHD is a separate conversation that obviously we need to have for personal reasons.
yeah,
But but the point is, I'm with
both
you,
of us.
and I know that um, we need these practices. Here's my problem: it takes a long time, right? And I like that because what builds slow lasts long, right? But the problem is I don't have time for that right now, right? I have very demanding clients. I have high pressures. I got two kids, okay, and I'm coming off. So someone like me, and I know the truth. I know that I have to switch my lifestyle. I know it's not balanced. I've already experienced all the ills of that. I'm on the same page. But now, how can I practically implement and shift from depending on these chemicals that I know are bad for me, then going to these holistic practices without in the interim sacrificing the immediate? Because like practically for me, for example, like I swung the other way where I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to completely everything just focus on getting full rest, good food, all of that. But guess what, I wasn't as productive legally, right? And so that was a problem for me. What I found was I'm in the best state I've ever was, presence wise, balance wise, and otherwise, but I'm still not getting it done professionally as I was when I was in this other mode, right? So what I'm saying is that's for me the real difficulty is that signs of that transition. But I guess that's where people like you come in and help navigate that.
Yeah, where our thoughts go, our energy flows. And then that turns into action. And I think for me, spiritually speaking, in order to ascend, food and putting the inputs that you receive, whether it's through the eye, through observation, through the smells, where are you, and equally, if not more importantly, the food that we put into our body, because we do it on a daily basis. And we see on a daily basis. And what we choose to see and look at and what we choose, that's probably less of a concern because food has a physical impact to our body. And in fact, it takes up all three sciences. There's a biological aspect to food, there's chemical interactions that go on inside the body, and then there's a quantum or the physical realm that has to be sound in order for the food to reach every single one of our cells. And if the food and the mind aren't aligned in as an optimal state as possible, you're going to have a hard time accepting the benefits of the food that it's supposed to provide.
So wait, so
So,
unpack that for me for a little bit. Like getting your
energetically speaking,
okay, so if you're basically saying if your mind is not in the right place, you're not necessarily going to be able to benefit from that holistic pure food in the way that you need to then actualize that in yourself.
so there's a quantum realm and there's a physical realm. So let's just talk about the physical realm really
Okay.
quickly. If very simply, if this is stuff that everybody knows, even you
Sure.
intuitively know this. If you come to the table angry, or if you come to the table stressed, to the dinner table stressed, and you don't make an intention that, well, I mean, I think intention is a huge part of this, but I'm not going to say if you don't make an intention. That's probably a pretty strong statement, um, because there's always partial. So what
Okay.
I'm saying is, if you're stressed and you ingest food, your digestion is not working properly,
So
and
you're
so
saying
you're
your
not
emotions are affecting your actual
a hundred
digestion
percent,
process.
a
Really?
hundred percent.
Wow.
Then there are layers on top of that. So
Okay.
then, what's a layer on top of that? You come to the dinner table de-stressed. What's another layer that you can add on? You look at your food, and you look at your food in a grateful way from the provider, and you look at the food as a healing modality for your body. And I'm not talking about, I'm just talking about, why are we eating? We're eating for
Nourishment.
nourishment.
Right.
We're eating, what is nourishment? Nourishment is, let me just put some visuals to this. The food comes into our stomach, it goes into our intestines, it gets absorbed into the superhighway of our bloodstreams. The nutrients get extracted as magnesium, vitamin C, enzymes, amino acids, all the essential nutrients that we talk about, and they get shuttled to each and every one of our cells in our body.
Mm.
And that shuttling to each and every one of our cells in our body occurs optimally if you have soundness in your body, if you approach the food with gratitude, if you approach the food with intention.
So when you
And
say
that's
soundness, you mean emotionally and mentally, yeah, psychologically.
correct. Correct. So
Right.
you're happy with your food. You're looking at your food as a mode of healing, and that requires, you say a prayer, and you say, "May the food enter in the body in a nourishing way."
Mhm.
And when you sit there with intentionality and you think about, you take deep breaths. When you take deep breaths, you take the breath in your diaphragm. You're expanding your diaphragm, and it's kind of going and pressing down in your stomach. You feel the sensation of your stomach. I can feel my stomach right now. And you can feel, is your stomach calm, or does it have kind of butterflies in there, and is there some you know is it not as calm as it should be? And so you work on that calmness before you take the food in, so that you receive the best benefit from it.
And so, what you're saying is fascinating. And here's what I'm thinking about. What I'm trying to figure out is how to untangle this puzzle. And I think it has to, like, for me, focusing on one of these aspects at a time, like emotional wellness, nutritional wellness, psychological wellness, physical wellness. At least that's how I've approached it. Again, maybe that's a discussion. Maybe I'm doing that wrong. Maybe I'm supposed to be focusing on all of them together. But I find that my attention is divided, right? But these things are all interconnected, right? Because you even
They're
they
uh,
say
they are
gut,
interconnected.
it's like gut instinct, right? So you have your literal another brain in your stomach, you have your heart, and you have your mind. And all of these systems talk to each other, and we now know they literally communicate through chemicals in your body. Um, Now the problem is which one to solve first. Because like you're saying before, right? Okay, well, you're not going to be able to really absorb the nutrients you get unless you're in a good state. So to me, what seems like emotionally is what we need to get right first. And this is what I was thinking earlier in the day. Most of us are inept emotionally because, first of all, we don't have the right communication skills. We don't even know the words to be able to communicate externally or internally. Because we can't internally communicate, we can't digest our emotions. We're emotionally constipated. And because of that, everything else, you're emotionally constipated, then you'll be physically constipated, or at least not be able to digest and extract properly. So I guess in my mind, what we really need to do is focus on resolving our emotional issues, dealing with the trauma, getting real with it, whatever we have to do, the breathing, the yoga, the whatever, the praying, all of it. And then we can actually focus on nutritional health, extract the nutrients we need from that. Then our prayer will get right, etc. And
So
then
let
our
me add a little bit to that. I think we may be saying the same thing, and I might even possibly push back on that.
yes,
But we may be saying the same thing. So you can correct me if I'm wrong.
okay,
Um, when we eat good food, let's say, okay, so today there's a practice in meat production. And the practice in meat production is that they herd the cattle and they herd the animal chickens. Those are the two most popular meat that is prevalent in the United States and possibly around the world. Um, and they keep them in these very artificially created lots that they are reared in. they're uh, they're fed in and they're fed fake food. Do you think an animal prefers to be free and running around on pastured land versus this way? The answer is obvious. 99+% of the meat that lands on our plate today is not tayyib, is not clean, is not that animal. We is happier on the pasture and consequently sad in not in the pasture.
Dang.
And so now when we decide to slaughter that animal,
Wow.
we are going to put that sad energy inside
Wow.
of us.
Wow. So wow. Okay, continue. But wow, because what I thought about there is like we literally have to, in order to fix our emotions, we first have to fix the emotions of the animals we're eating. Because what you're saying makes perfect sense.
No, so what I'm getting, so
Yeah.
yes, yes, but what I'm actually getting at is then we're going to put that nourishment or that food into our bodies.
Mhm.
That's going to have an effect on our thoughts.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. So what
Right.
yours,
Right.
you started the discussion by saying thoughts should start first. I think it's going to have to be like this.
Well, I guess I know. What I was trying to wonder is if like dealing with my emotions, right? Now I sound like Drake. Dealing with my emotions or dealing with my food. What should I focus my energy on? Okay. But what you're saying, and this makes sense. Look, we learned early that energy is not created nor destroyed by humans, right? Allah creates. But in this world, it's just transferred. So that's a basic
Yes,
concept. So we're saying
yes,
is these
yes,
animals literally are trapped. They have all these negative feelings. That literal vibrational resonance frequency is literally transferred and
yes,
becomes a part of you,
yes,
right?
and that's what acts on our quantum realm or our physical realm. And so the physical realm or the quantum realm is this. It's plasma. It's at the level of plasma. So we're 90% water,
Mhm.
but it's not water that you find when you open the tap. The
Mm.
water phase that our bodies contain is called plasma, and it's like the fourth phase of water. Jerry Pollock is the one who pioneered this idea. So the water isn't like the water that just flows through our tap. The water is more closer to the stream that flows in nature in the wild, and it's a different type of it's not actually it's so if there might have been some it's almost like when you pick it up it's almost connected. So it's almost like a
Oh.
plasma.
But isn't there
uh,
isn't there an idea in physics that once things are connected, they're never actually truly separated on a quantum physics level? Like they're literally
that's right, that's right, and that connection is very important. And so yes, I'm agreeing with you.
wow.
The thoughts are going to drive that quantum level of connection. And water, 90, the reason why we're 90% water is communication. That is how our body is intracellularly communicating with each other. And that is another phase that it goes into, and that's light. I'm not even gonna, I'm not,
I
yes, our cells communicate using light. So the smallest particle of light is called a biophoton. And the way our cells communicate with each other is through biophotons. So a biophoton is an information carrier.
okay.
That's another discussion that we won't necessarily shouldn't get into now, but the point being that everything is interconnected, and
Right, exactly.
what we put into our body, if it's of sound, quantum, energetically sound, including plants, and that's the business that I'm in, including plants, including the animal that was treated well or not treated well, is going to have an effect on our thoughts
Well, that's the thing is I think that's where I mess
and
up.
everything else and
And
the energy about us
I mean,
holistically.
like the light is important, and I think that's where all this blue light, Blu-ray, you know what I'm saying, the technology, that's where it gets in. That's definitely messing us up. So there's stuff like the light phone that I still want to look into. We'll get into that later.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're like what I've been missing. I feel like is that I think I have to attack it on the quantum level because I'm telling you, I've tried it on the
Absolutely.
regular level and
Everything
it's
is
not
quantum.
working. I mean, it's
Everything is
working actually.
quantum.
Alhamdulillah. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't write it off. Like, alhamdulillah, I've been progressing overall more holistically, eating better, working better emotionally, counseling, all these things, right? Making effort. But I guess what I'm frustrated with is at a certain point, you really just want to address the essence of the issue. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at here. And what you're saying is basically that on a quantum level, everything is connected. And that's why, for example, family ties are so important. That's why the mothers, literally, I can call my mother, hey, mom, how you doing? What's wrong? What? I said
100%.
2 words. That's literally
100%.
quantum physics right there. So
Yes.
that's what I
When
really,
somebody when
yeah.
somebody walks into the room and they're upset, you can feel it.
Right. Why? And in fact, there's a thing called like heart mind resonance. So I think there's actually they measure like when you say oh that vibe or whatever or I connected with that person. I think they've actually scientifically studied now that your heart basically can give off a certain frequency that
Absolutely.
resonates with one's mind. So essentially, we're just like walkie talkies walking around, and it's like an electric mess out here.
Yes, 100%. You couldn't have said it better.
So here's the thing. Let's say I'm like, okay, now I'm with you and I want to fix this. So how but I eat halal zabiha, and obviously like we said we know that that's unfortunately that's just they say bismillah Allahu Akbar and it's the fiqh of the day. Let's take the surface and where the real cookie is at, I don't know, but we need to actually get where can I get that, especially if I'm someone who's like and like any of us, right? We're struggling here and there, we're paying our bills, alhamdulillah, we're doing what we can, but they make this stuff impossible. And I'm guessing that's part of why you were setting out on your entrepreneurial venture to try to create this type of sustainability. But I guess my pragmatic question for you is, what are ways that I can basically put some energy positive food in me so that I can get a handle on my emotions so that I can physically be sound so that I can spiritually be productive?
Yeah, this is what I'm going to say is nothing that you don't already know. Everybody has the answer, especially as Muslims. We already have the answer. It's in our practice. The only issue is that we're learning, and I'm completely guilty of this. And my prayers could be 2,000 times better, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And it's almost like you have to separate yourself out from the prayer and do another meditation. But the prayer is the meditation. So what I would do, so in a patient scenario, you have to be a bit more formal. You can't prescribe prayer
Right,
to a
right, right.
patient. And we're going to start off with, well, let's see what's going on. But let's see what you're doing today, and
Mhm.
let's go through a process of elimination. So I'm going to actually look in your fridge. I'm going to look in your pantry. I'm going to look at where you shop and what you put, and I'll look at the ingredients that are inside your food, and we'll say, let's remove all these bad energy items from your life,
Mhm.
and let's figure out what's going on in your home. Is there mold? Is there EMFs running around? What are you doing to create a bioshield around you so that you can ward off those EMFs? And then what are you doing with intentionality? So those are sort of the three areas. So environmental, there's genetics that come into play,
Okay.
but um, a very small
That we
amount.
can't control. And
Lifestyle.
right.
So the genetics, just for the listeners, the genetics help you set up for who you are today and how you process stuff, whether it's physical food or emotional um,
Processing.
rationality, I guess. How you process information. That's the genetic makeup. If you have sound practices of inputs, meditative inputs, pure food inputs, your genetics won't matter. You will have to stay in the sun or out of the sun longer or less time, depending on your genetics and depending on how you process the vitamin D. But by and large, what you can, if you have good sound practices, as long as if you know that, then epigenetics is what takes over. And epigenetics is what do you do internally that exhibits genetics, and genetics can change.
So let me, I think, try to. I like where you're going with the genetic part, and that's why I was joking because people think like neuroscience is complicated. Like genetics is really where it gets messy.
Yeah.
But what I would say about genetics is that not necessarily that they don't matter, but it's just I think what you're getting at is that it's a matter of everybody has unique genetics, and it's a
Yes.
matter of basically bringing out the best of your genetics. And we can do that through these different ways. And I think that we fall into two extremes, like you were mentioning earlier. I want to prescribe the payer. And even though that's kind of a joke, we kind of that's actually a problem for us. You know why? Because you have the people who are like, "Oh, you having problems? Just say dua. Just go read this Quran." And then you have the people who are like, "Oh,
Yeah.
go seek this yoga master." But my point is, sometimes like we do actually, in order to improve the prayer, we need to do breathing exercises.
We
In order
do.
to improve the prayer, we need to sit there for 10 minutes and literally meditate by not thinking about anything and just letting your thoughts flow. And that's the trap we fall in, right?
Yeah, no, and my mother used to tell me, do your niyyah before you start the prayer. That's the intentionality.
Right.
The saying Bismillah before you eat your food. We just say Bismillah and we just start scarfing the food
Right.
down. But
Right.
no, what it's meant to be is Bismillah. Oh, this food is here for healing, and it's real intentionality. That should be like probably longer than the amount of times it takes to eat your food.
That's true. We do rush through that. And that's something
Right.
that the Christians I think do a better job of just like
Yeah.
sitting
Agreed.
down to say a prayer before they eat,
Agreed. And we wrote the book on it.
I
You
know
know,
that's a sad thing.
it is a sad thing.
So
Yeah.
look, a lot of the things you mentioned, and I do want to actually get into those in further conversations as far as the
Inshallah.
EMF goes and all of that. But sitting here from a bystander perspective, it's like that's overwhelming. That's a lot to deal with. What how give me a focus plan. And so what it sounds like from our conversation, the focus plan is focus on your food. Like
Eat
focus
or
get your food.
let's start with eat organically
Okay.
and eat intentionally and don't eat so much.
What do you mean by
Eat
eat intentionally?
eat intentionally meaning just what we were speaking about. There's so there was an exercise I did in a class where they put a piece of chocolate on our tongue. How do we eat chocolate? We eat chocolate, we bite it out, and we swallow it.
Okay.
But do this exercise. Put a piece of chocolate or any good tasting food, a fruit, on your tongue and just hold it there. Hold it there for as long as you can.
Wow.
Just let it rest and allow it to give you the ambiance, give you the texture. Think about it. And so
Eat mindfully.
all I'm saying is slow down.
Yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
I'm what I'm saying is slow down, be intentional on what you buy. Don't go. I have a controversial view on the meat. I won't touch chicken
Okay.
outside. I will only touch pasture raised chicken.
Okay.
I will not touch meat. If I go to someone's house, I will have it.
Okay.
But it's not tayyib for me.
Mm.
And if
Because of
and
the
this
animal
this this
practices, because of
this
like the
may
humane
be
practices.
this may be logically not a correct argument,
Okay.
but if you mistreat an animal, that's considered haram. Downstream, anything from that animal is haram.
Well, I don't think it's. I think there's a difference looking at something from an ihsan perspective and from a fiqh perspective. So obviously, it would be difficult, especially to say that legally, you know what I'm saying, it's actually haram because haram
Right.
is obviously a big rule.
Right.
From an ihsan perspective of like a beautification and a morally high standards, I agree with you, and not just me, other scholars. I know that, like for example, I think it was Ibn Taymiyyah. He wouldn't eat from a food if he didn't know the land that it was grown on. If that
Yeah.
land was taken by oppression, he considered that not tayyib for him. So
And
that's
so the communities that I'm running around in right now, we're talking about, well, what is our sources of food? So I'm actually planning blockchain to bring yet another thing in. Blockchain is that transparency, which we talked about. If you're
exactly.
following us, we
I
talked
agree.
about transparency. So where did the food come from? So we can actually take blockchain, apply that technology to all the raw ingredients that are coming, and are they coming from tayyib sources? And so that's what we're doing with our soil. And that's what you want to do is you want to intimately know your farmer. Today, it's impossible to intimately know your farmer because your farmer is Walmart.
Exactly. So there's two extremes. It's like I have to grow it in my backyard or I have to eat Walmart. And there's nothing in
No,
between.
that's what people think, but
Okay.
that's not the way it is.
Okay.
Let's start by eating organically. Let's send a message and say,
Sure.
I demand organic. Let's
Sure.
start there, and then we can get into more specifics as the listeners would like in subsequent episodes.
But and to your point though, I literally did a Google search the other day, and apparently around me there's this place, and it's kind of like an organic subscription. So they're a farm, everything is organic, and you
Yeah.
literally pay a set amount like weekly or bi-weekly. It's very reasonable, like 40, $50. And they give you a set of 4 different fruits and 5 different vegetables, a certain amount of pounds of that every week. So you come and you just get your load of fruits and vegetables, and it's just like an ongoing thing. And I was like, this is amazing. And it was right here. It's like something I didn't know about. So I think that there are those things that we can certainly take advantage of. It's just, again, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? And this is, I think, the fundamental problem where why we don't get things done, because it's like, yeah, yeah, I'll deal with that. Organic is on my thing to do, like fix my food habits. It's on my list. But first, I have X, Y, Z. I got to clean the backyard. I got to do my clients, blah, blah, blah. But it's almost like I think that's the mess of it all, right? Like until I can actually clean up the food, then we can't fix up our life.
Right. I agreed. Sorry, I just got interrupted there
No, no worries.
for a second. No, yeah, 100%. It can be very simple. Don't make it overwhelming. It can be very, sorry, I should say, it can be very overwhelming because there's so much to learn. And what I would do is I would just start with the organic, start with whole foods
What do
that
you mean
you
by
can
Whole
eat.
Foods?
Whole foods, like a whole apple, not processed and not ingredients that you don't understand. And
Okay.
that's a good way to start. And then go to the butcher and say, how did you raise that chicken? How did you raise that cow? How did you raise that lamb? Lamb and goat I prefer because they're less likely to be sent to factories.
So
They're more likely to be pastured, and so I preferred that. And the prophet's meat was meat of
okay.
choice was lamb.
And that's why I think, honestly, practically, in order, I'm always thinking like, okay, what you're saying, and I'm trying to think about how I can practically implement it. And what I see is basically I'm gonna have to go semi-vegetarian. And the meat I do get, I'm gonna have to just get from, like, I look up online. There's these places, they ship them, they're organic, they're raised well, they're definitely all out there on these websites, and we can share some of those.
Yep.
And it's obviously more expensive, but that's okay. I'll just it's actually not even that much more expensive when I think about it. Whether you're like me, a nomad by nature, which I quite appreciate. And actually, I built that into my professional practice, is making everything remote so that I can be on the go and experience life and experience the world. So I do appreciate that about you. I wanted to kind of bring a natural flow to the conversation, and then we can kind of conclude. We don't have to go on about it, but I was just where we left off was basically to summarize. There's a lot of we have to get control of our energy. And that comes out in a number of ways, primarily through food, through spiritual practices, through technology, through our emotional behavior. And we're trying to figure out and piece a system so that we can actually gain control of our life by gaining control of
Yeah.
these aspects of it. We came to a notion that we have to gain control of our emotions. And then you kind of showed me that, well, our emotions are being affected by the food. And it's not just the food, but the emotions of that food that we're eating. And so
Mm.
then we started talking about basically, well, we need to then start off, let's eat organic. And as far as the animal goes, we have to start asking questions. But now where I was leaving off was basically, I want a practical plan. I want a take home plan. So what I'm basically getting from you is, if I want to be serious, and I know it's going to take effort, but I also want just like a streamlined, simple solution for actually doing these things, then the plan is basically I got to go semi-vegetarian. And basically most of my food has to just be fruits and vegetables, nuts, like holistic stuff, not processed stuff, not boxed stuff. And as far as the meats go, I have to be very particular with that, and I should basically just order that from like places that I know are actually doing the right thing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is correct. Some places I've ordered meat online, and it can be pretty pricey. The thing is, though, where do you want to spend your money? Do you
Right,
want to
that's
spend
the
your
thing.
Do you want to spend your money on better food, or do you want to spend money on rectifying your health later on in life? And it
Exactly.
becomes, and some of the stuff that you see out there, it's very complex to solve and then to remove from your system. So if you've got toxicity building up over decades or years and years, to remove it can be quite difficult. And the conversation I had today was about colonics as an example.
Mhm.
Colonics as an example. And I'm not a proponent of colonics. I'm a proponent of what occurs naturally.
What's
And
colonics?
colonics is the cleaning out of your intestine
Okay.
by pushing water through from behind.
Okay.
So it's colonics is a hydrotherapy.
Wow. Okay, that's nice.
And it's a big practice in the natural health
Okay,
practitioner world.
interesting.
And the reason why they say so, perhaps once or twice, the reason why they say that you need it nowadays, whereas in the past you didn't, is because of the onslaught of the environmental toxins, not oh, including the food toxins.
Mhm.
So even if you remove the poor food choices from your diet, 50% of USDA. I mean, I hate to say this, but after speaking of organic is the place to be, but one step at a time. The USDA has found, and this is the USDA that's saying this, 50% of the organic food is coming back with pesticides on it.
Yeah, but it's not that the organic is pesticide free. It's supposed to be 90% pesticide free. And I think that's kind of because look, this is really the devil's trap here. Whenever you tell people I eat organic, or as my mom calls it, it oregano di, like what's this
Yeah,
oregano?
right.
But when you tell people, they're like, oh, it's not organic anyway. And that's just frankly that what's it called? That dismissive philosophy of
Yeah,
cancel culture. You know, it's like
yeah.
we're
No, you
trying.
have to start off with organic. You have to start off with organic. And just to kind of tie up a couple of these threads that we created, the quantum realm, love, and intention.
Sure.
What in the quantum realm, what we send out is what we get back. So there's something called the observer effect in the quantum realm, and if we look at something with love, you're going to get love back. You cannot demand love from a significant other. You cannot say, "Oh, you have to love me," or no. If you want the other person to love you, if you want love to come back through an animal, you have to love it first, completely selflessly. That's when that love will come back to you. You can't ask for that love when you do. So it's holistic. It's not something that occurs just by itself. And so what we put out, it has to be from within us, and whatever we put out is what we're going to receive in the world.
So I think that that's really a fun, it's almost like a tack on point, but subhanAllah, that is the main point. And I think one way, like for me, for example, I have a to-do list, a checklist every day, and I added on top of it that in the morning at a certain point, I stop and I literally set my intention for the day. Like, okay, and I think that as part of that, that's where like I literally put like reminders to myself, like, may Allah accept, and the mission is to get closer to Allah. And like again, I'm not great with it, I barely do, I'm not saying anything about that. My point is,
Yeah,
I realize for myself I need a specific reminder in my phone that's a timeout, and set it. And I think that if I add this quantum love aspect that you're talking about, which
yeah,
was that is the essence of the sunnah. That's why
it
Rasulullah
is.
is Habibullah, right?
Yes,
I mean, he's putting out love, and that's what he gets.
yes,
That's what we're seeing.
that's 100%, 100%. And they've already proved this in science outside of Islam. This is a recent phenomenon. I think in the 1950s or 60s, which is it's called the observer effect.
Well, they call it law of
So
attraction and all. I mean, basically, it's
that's
50
right.
ways to say the same thing in 50 Shades of Grey from their perspective,
That's
right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you know, on a quantum level, you're saying that's what we have to add in as well, like be intentional, uh,
Yeah.
simplify, I guess, kind of simple. So let me
No
ask
matter
you,
how bad it gets, no matter how bad it gets, man, no
yeah,
matter how bad it gets.
here's a real challenge
And
though, because sorry, you said one thing earlier about when you go to other people's houses. Sorry, so just finish your thought first. I apologize.
no, no, no. So it's fine. I was just saying that no matter how challenged we are, and I know that we're challenged. Perhaps generations before us were challenged too. Everybody has their own set of challenges, and so did the prophet. And he had challenges that I cannot even fathom. When I read about the story of Taif or the event during Taif, I cannot even fathom that. And he was alone. I just cannot fathom that. So whatever we go through, whatever we're going through, it's child's play as far as I'm concerned.
That's true.
Just let it roll off your back and just keep trudging along with love.
So this is on that point, right? Because one of the challenges to that is when you start, when you want this, right? And clearly we do. This is what's being brought in our lives. and you start to set this intentionality and you start going on this path. That's when Shaitan rolls up his sleeves. And where does he come from? From your friends and your family. And then boom, here goes crazy Ahmed with all his crazy habits and being real particular. And come on, calm down, have some nachos. Right. So what I'm saying is, and I liked your point before when you said, well, I'll eat it when I'm at someone's house, because I think that's where
Yeah,
principles come into play and there's wisdom in that. You know what I
exactly,
mean? And when you're in that situation, I think you just have to make dua. Allah, give me the benefit of
exactly.
this and remove
Or
its.
you just take, or you just take a little bit. So what I do usually is, if I know that the food is not necessarily going to fully agree with me, I will eat something before I go, so that I'm not wolfing it down. And then to honor the host for
Right.
putting the food so graciously in front of me, I will eat a little bit, of course, without.
So, but how do you face this resistance that you'll inevitably face? Like, for example, and especially for my kids, because I know that, look, how much work I'm having to do to fix my gut health and my physiological health, which are interconnected. There's a whole book, Gaps by Dr. Natasha McBride. So I want to prevent that for my kids, right? I don't want them to have to do. I want to advance. I'm sick of playing defense for generations. I want to play offense.
Yeah,
So, but when I bring them over to my mom's house, right, Situ's house, well, now we have all these things, that they have at the
yeah,
house. So
yes.
I guess how can we approach this situation where we want to elevate and raise our frequency, and that requires us to be very particular about the frequencies that we're in or around, and yet some of the people in our lives may not be around that frequency and may actually be averse to it.
Yeah, that's I get that question a lot. I get those comments a lot. Um, and what you do is, so for yourself, I just mentioned you eat before you go to someone's house, and then you minimize your eating at that person's house. For your children, um, they go through phases: 0 to 7, 7 to 13, and 13 and onwards. Um, there's education. Just with love, speak to them in the best possible way. They're smart and they understand. Don't You're not gonna say, "Oh, don't eat that food. That food is haram, or that food is not tayyib." But no, that is a negative approach.
Hmm.
The approach is, here are the different types of foods that are available to us, and we're going to go and we're going to have something. So don't worry about it. But you should know, and you should, actually, it shouldn't even come up in that context. It should come up in the context of educating your child away from, as an example. So
What do you
it
mean
should
by
come up
that?
as
That last point, like you shouldn't do it in
meaning
the context of them having dinner.
meaning you shouldn't, because they may say something to
No,
the
but I think,
relative.
see, I disagree. I think that's
Okay,
exact. You know why? Because then you teach them hikmah at the same time. You say, look, we're gonna go there, but don't say anything because this is not wrong, and this is our host, and they're being kind to us. So we're gonna, and you're. That's what I'm saying. So because you know what the problem is, we're not giving them the hikmah with the knowledge. And so now they'll know.
yeah,
Oh, I had this knowledge about that, but instead of growing up
right.
and being
What's the
arrogant about it,
practicality?
and being look at these dumb food people, they're like,
Yeah,
I remember my parents taught me that. There's wisdom in
yeah.
this.
It's basically emotional intelligence, and you do it in the best way possible. So yeah,
And
yeah.
if they have to out you at the dinner table and say, "Mom, why are you eating that poison?" I mean, from the kids, it might help.
Right, right. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead. What's on your mind?
No, that's it. Yeah, no, just getting back to the, the topic at hand. It doesn't have to be. It is going in a direction globally that we don't want it to go into, but the fight is always local. And what I mean by that is, global swaths of political hegemonic rulemaking have always been changed through revolution, through individual public revolution, and the only enlightenment. And the only way to do that is if we, one step at a time, it has to be done at the core, at the grassroots. And that's the only way we're going to be able to take control back of, let's say, our food. That's my plight.
Mhm.
My plight, my startup, my stuff is related to food and the individual, empowering urbanites to understand what food is, where does it come from, And I think that's a main root of all the issues that we're seeing, at least, health wise.
I think something on this topic. I mean, so I told you, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I had this Invisalign teeth put in because basically my bite was going down, and so it was going to cause an issue for me in the future. But the point is, I found it fascinating, the process, and it taught me a lot about change. They did
Hmm.
it in 35 different sets, and I have to wear each set for 10 days. But so basically, it took my teeth, and then they took the
Wow.
final version, and then they literally just took tiny variations of angles, and for 10 days, it will hold in that position. And I was just mind blown because I was like, this is how you train the nefs. You literally switch the
Yes.
angle a little bit. And I feel like
Yes.
for this food and stuff, right, that's the way to go about it. So, like, if I'm at the stage where it's like I'm not watching anything, or then maybe I just be like, okay, well, I'm going to cut out like box process or this group of food, or I'm going
Yeah.
to be better, or one day a week, I'm going to eat healthy, you know? And if we're at the stage, well, I'm pretty conscious, but I'm not really super particular about it. I think then that's where we really have to be like, well, okay, I have to check into now where am I getting my food, and what's the main source of my food? Because the thing is, sometimes you don't keep track, right? And it's like what you measure will grow, and that's the problem. Is we just feel like with these calories, we just kind of treat it like a side topic. Because the funny thing is, we started this conversation about mental health. The whole thing has been about food, but
Yeah.
but that's the reality of it, though, isn't it?
Yeah. No, again, different people have different perspectives. If you speak to a doctor of psychiatry, they're going to talk about, well, they're missing this chemical, and so we're going to rebalance that chemical. So it's the perspective. Well, Allah knows best. I have gone, as I've peeled away the layers on what the sources of some of our biggest ailments are, it's always come up as what are we, the onslaught of stuff that's coming at us, whether it's ephemeral, meaning whether it's spiritual, whether it's emotional, from someone else, whether it's spiritual, from your own mind, your thoughts, and the food and the lifestyle, and the others, like the EMFs. So there's an onslaught coming, and if you're not aware of that, more now than ever before. We never had these first world problems back in the day,
All right.
in previous generations, and so we're seeing this more. And so when you talk about tools, and we need better tools, maybe that's what I'm speaking about, is that yes, life has changed from our forefathers and mothers, and we do probably need to kind of relook at the way things were done with a new light. And so
And by the way, I don't necessarily think that like the Western paradigm and what you're saying are mutually exclusive, and that one is right or the other. To me, the
yeah,
situation is that because of how we've been raised and the foods and everything we've been conditioned on, these processes that you're suggesting, they don't work for when you're in that state. So sometimes it's almost like you need that Western, more significant intervention, whether chemically or otherwise, to bring you to a more moderate state. And from there, that's when you can come in and, like you said before about the not really getting the nutrients from the food until you're emotionally and mentally
yeah,
there. So same thing is like sometimes you can't really even, because what you're talking about really is long-term generational core change. And so I think it's kind of a two-stage thing. Is like first you got to deal with the immediate issues and just get to like normal surface level balance, and that's where the Western stuff comes in. That's helpful. Once you're there, then you can basically kind of go to, and I guess it's not like an either or, but gradually you try to build in these things and just be conscious of their effect on your life.
yeah, absolutely. On that note, I think that's a good place to segue.
Inshallah. All right, brother. Great talking to you.
Inshallah.
We'll pick it up
Same
next
here.
time.
Okay, inshallah.
All
Speak
right.
to you soon. Take care.